Hello and welcome to syn101 here at FX PhD, class number 7, John Montgomery with you, as always serving as the voice for Victor Wolonsky. Before we dive into our image sequence for this week, I want to just kind of pick up a little bit where we left off last week. We're going to use 3ds Max for this demonstration, but likelihood is you're going to run into this in whatever application you're using. We'll go ahead and drag in this Max scene file that we exported from Synthise, and to demonstrate kind of the stuff that you might find in your 3D application of choice. So let's go ahead and turn on the background. You can see that actually our images or frames are only taking up half of the number of frames that are visible here on our timeline. Notice we have over 460 frames visible, but you can see that things aren't lining up, the boxes aren't lining up or anything like that. But this is because we treated each field as an individual frame when we were dealing with it in Synthise, and you can see that along the legs. You can see some of the interlacing and stuff that's here in our image. So you think what you could do is go ahead and change your frame rate. You can see actually that this ended up being exported at 48 frames per second, which is kind of double film length, 24 frames per second, but this isn't correct because this is actually PAL footage that was done at 25 frames per second. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and open up this Max script here. It's a text editable file, and this could work for maybe other types of exports as well. We'll change the frame rate to 50. Go ahead and hit save. Close out of that. We'll go back here and we'll reset everything here in Max so we can start clean. No voodoo going on. We'll go ahead and switch back out here and drag the script back in. And then we'll go ahead and display background. We'll go ahead and switch the frame per second. You can see that that's set up to 50. We'll go ahead and change that to 25. And you can see just jogging through, this seems to be lining up correctly. And if we take a look at the curve editor, we can actually see very graphically what's happening. We'll go ahead and select the camera and then zoom in closely here. And you can see all the various keys that we have. And if we jog forward a frame, you can actually, we're skipping 2 keys. So you can see that that's actually every individual field is now being displayed as a keyframe here. So you can see that the timing lines up correctly as well. So now we can go ahead and render it as we need to, and it'll be correctly positioned on each of the frames that we have. Now you're going to have a lot of different applications, or various applications you're going to be using the tracking data, and they all have their own way of dealing with this kind of thing. But since there were kind of questions that came up related to interlacing in the forums, decided to kind of take a look at this. This is something to keep in mind when you're importing your projects from Synthise for stuff that you've worked on in fields and had to deinterlace it. So let's go ahead and move on to our shot for this week. And we're going to use a shot that's been kind of covered in the past in some of our other tracking courses, and the reason we're doing that is because it actually shows a lot of really useful stuff, and I think it's, Victor feels that it's useful to be able to show different approaches between various applications and so forth. And it's actually kind of a difficult shot to track, and it's not really an easy one. I wouldn't consider it a 101 level track. So here are our settings that we have. We'll see how fairly simple it is to work with here in Synthise. We've got some good ways of working with it. So let's go ahead and accept these default settings that we've got here. Load the frames in. Now we're not going to go in and dive in and hit the auto button and running the auto tracker like we've done in classes in the past. We're going to do something a little bit differently, and this panel you can actually breaks down the process of what's happening. So what we can do is blip all the frames and then go ahead and then convert to tracking points if we want, and peel the frames that we want, or peel all the frames if you want, or so forth. Again, just a different way of doing this than using the auto tracking version. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do blip all the frames. And you can see that you actually end up getting quite a few points visible You got a lot of points actually down here in the carpet, a lot of information off points, a lot of points in the background and so forth. You can look at some of the areas on the right on that focus chart, and that focus chart on the left in the background, as well as our tracking points that are visible. Actually, not many up there at the top, but lots of very good paths. You can see they're actually pretty long here. You can tell just in examining, looking to see, even throughout the motion blur. So it's pretty cool how you can actually get this. It's kind of an awesome result. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and peel all. And essentially what it is kind of coming in and running the auto tracker. So now we've got our decent tracking points. Now, we talked about before in the past this idea of drawing a mask, and this is something Victor didn't want to do, is spend the time drawing the mask to just show how easy it is to go in and manually move the various points that we have that are linked to our talent here. Much faster than going in frame by frame and creating a mask or something when there might actually be some overlap anyway on her. And we'll take a look at these. So again, it takes just a couple minutes, if not even a minute, to go ahead and remove what we needed versus going through and rotoscoping this entire sequence. So now we've got those all cleared off. So it's not tracking on here. We'll hit go. And you can see they've got a solution that's a little bit nutty. You can see some stuff moving around. You've got these points over here way over the place, but they're really not that far away. So we'll go ahead and select them and delete them. Hit go. And now we're starting to get something errors below a pixel. And we're starting to get something that's maybe, but it's kind of weird if we take a look at it. Check out this kind of big jump here. There's probably something going on, as we discovered last time. So let's see what tracking point is looking bad. And you can actually see down here in the lower right the tracking point that's not so good. You can see it kind of jumping around, and that's what's causing our jump and errors in the camera. So go ahead and delete that and hit go. And the error level was reduced. And you can see we've got some stuff. But again, there's some noise in it still in this part of the camera move. There's trackers that are kind of jumping around if we look really, kind of floating a little bit, shaking, and causing some of the problems. There's some other trackers that are causing us problems and so forth within the scene that are contributing to, making a lot of noise for us in the path of our camera. So it's actually automatic tracker. Got someplace kind of quickly. I mean, that only took us 3 or 4 minutes to do. And if you think about it, there's a lot of motion blur. And take a look at this spot here. These points, you've got a bunch of different tracker marks, but those are actually the same point they're referencing. They should actually be at the same point in 3D space. Basically what's happening is it's occasionally losing that tracker mark on the green screen, and it's thinking it's 4 different points when in reality it should be 1. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to show how you can get a much better result by doing a manual tracker and approaching it by hand. Another reason the robots won't be taking over for us. So we'll go ahead and reload the scene. This is just the default scene with the image sequence loaded in that we're providing. So just go ahead and start pinging out some tracking points within the scene that look good. So here's a really good one that we'll use here in the foreground. So we'll get it centered here. And again, you can adjust it by moving it around here in the little panel on the left, a little window on the left. Point that where we need it. So you've got a good, looks like you've got a good intersection. We'll go ahead and hit go. And it lost it really, really quickly. It didn't take long at all to lose that point. So that doesn't work. So what we want to do is we're going to go ahead and enlarge point. We're going to go ahead and enlarge the search area, and then go ahead and increase the size of actually what we're looking for. And so what we're going to do is, instead of referencing just a small area, we're going to adjust this and select the entire tracking marker. versus just an intersection of that. If you hit play, you can see it's actually tracking really well. It's actually doing a nice job even with all the motion blur that's visible in the scene. You can see that we've got a decent track for the duration of the shot. So go ahead and lock that because we like it. Now let's go ahead and select the next one and do the same thing. I love how it's kind of keeps the same size. We'll go ahead and hit play. And notice at this point, it starts to get lost because we have this flag that's here in our scene that's passing in front of our object. So it's getting a little bit confused. So what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and size it down just a bit so it's watching the inside of the tracker as opposed to the entire thing. I'll go ahead and hit play. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and change our filtering. You can see that by choosing the type of filtering that we have. If we switch to no resampling, you got the pixels looking like that. Say linear, you're doing linear refiltering, so it's a little bit soft, but it's going to, and then we've got Lankos too, and varying levels of Lankos. And Lankos filter is going to be much better up to this ×8. You can see that this resampling is looking really good. But if we jog through or play through here, you can see because of this resampling, it's taking a lot longer for it to actually do the track. But the end result of this is that you're going to end up getting a better track than you did before. So you can see that it's doing a really nice job up until the point it starts getting crossed behind or passed in front with the flag. But up to that point, it does a really nice job up to this point. So now what we want to do is delete the frames. What we can do is this little hotkey is we do Shift, now middle click, and what that'll do is it'll delete all the keys after that point, and that depends the direction of that arrow there. So since our arrow is pointing right, it's going to delete all the keyframes that are going forward in time or to the right. So let's get a few more trackers, but before we do that, let's go ahead and switch to normal resampling. So we don't need to use the uber strength resampling for most of these points. So let's just examine the scene and you figure out what would be a good thing to do. Let's go ahead and not forget to lock our tracking points. So let's go ahead and select this tracker. Again, we're starting back at the beginning. Make sure we're set up. Let's go ahead and go play. Now, right there, you can see that we start to get lost there when the finger crosses in front of the tracking point. So what we'll do is we'll keep this point as the last frame, and what we want to do is Shift, delete, middle click, and there we go. Click on now, gets erased the rest of the frames that we had. Go ahead and lock it. Now let's go jog forward here, and let's go ahead and create a new tracking point there and make sure that's right in the middle. And we'll go ahead and play it, and then we can see here, you can see that we start to lose it because our talent's face is encouraging on that. So what we can do is we got a couple tricks to try and keep our tracking point there. So let's go ahead and go to this first frame again. Just deleted the tracking marker. Make sure it's correct, and what we're going to do is we're going to set our key to 1 and smooth key. Now we go forward, and look, it actually did a really nice job of staying locked at a point. You can see here, even a little bit of tiny maybe drift at the end, but for the most part it stayed really, really close to it with that constant updating of the reference point. So now let's go ahead and open up the graph editor. And what we're going to do is we want to take tracker 5 and tracker 7 and let the software know that these are the same point. So what we want to do is hit Shift 7. And what that does is actually combines those two tracker points into one point in 3D space. And that's under track menu. And if you scroll down here, you can see it says combined selected trackers. That's Shift 7. And that really helps the software out know that it's one continuous point. Remember, as we saw with the auto tracker, we had all those multiple points. So now take a look at the graph. You can see it was just all red there, which means we need to add more tracking points. So let's go ahead and find a good point. You basically, again, want to find good overlap in time in very, very different places within the scenes. So go ahead and grab this point down here. Create the tracker there. Adjust that so it's in the middle. And we're going to track backwards. Okay. And now that got lost when it went off screen, and that's okay. So that's actually okay. Go ahead and come back here. When the tracker reappears within the scene, go ahead and add a tracker there. Make it sure it's set. Hit forward, which will actually track back, and you can see it goes out of screen again. That's actually not where we wanted to do it. We're going to wait until it comes back into the scene. So let's go ahead and go back to the first frame and go ahead and create the point. Switch the direction and go ahead and go forward. Now you can see we're going to select tracker 9 and 11. Select those 2 points and hit Shift 7 to combine those trackers into one. And now if you look here in the beginning, you can see now that they're the same point beginning to end with a big gap in the middle. Let's go ahead and find another one here on the top. Change direction. Go ahead and go through it. Okay, and you can see that we end up losing it. Find our last really good frame. Use our new favorite hotkey, Shift Middle Click, and we'll delete them from this point back to the beginning because our arrow is going backwards. Go ahead and lock that. Now if we look at our graph, you can see that we're starting to get better. The red areas are definitely no tracking information. Yellow areas are showing that we're getting closer to being able to solve those areas. It's kind of nice, the level of visual feedback that the software provides us. We'll go ahead and select this one. Go ahead and do a bit more adjusting. Track to the frontwards direction. It's lost there, which is okay. I'm just going to take a look at it, and that's okay. It comes back here. Can wait till there's a little bit less motion blur. Let's go here. Select it. You go forward. And then it goes to the end. Let's go ahead and go back. Select trackers 14 and 15. Shift 7 to combine them. You can see we've got more of the graph in yellow, so we're getting closer to having a possible solution. And then just again, looking for points here that might be good. This one probably in the corner is good, so we'll go ahead and select that. Backwards. It gets lost there. That's okay. And you can see now that we have some frames that could actually be solved. You can see the parts in green are the ones that can be solved. The ones in yellow need more trackers. I mean, it might be solved, but it's going to give you errors and so forth in that area. So again, the more trackers, the better. That's just kind of showing you the lowest baseline level that it can do to get us solved. Again, searching more. We'll take maybe this point here. Go forwards. Go ahead and play through up to the point where it goes bad. So find our last point. You see how it kind of jumps over? It kind of jumped around, but you could actually get a few more frames on this by setting key every one, smoothness, and sure enough, you got a few extra frames out of this as it was updating. Now it does, see, you can see it start to shift and lose the kind of detail and so forth. We've got a couple more that we're going to use, so we're going to go ahead and do the old shift middle click on now, delete on those that aren't any good, and then lock it. And then let's go ahead and select this point, go forward, and that's actually a point that's actually quite good for the entire duration. And you can see now that we've got a sequence that's almost ready to go, except for one little tiny sliver, one frame there of yellow. So we'll find a tracking point that's going to be visible for the duration, or let's go ahead and select this one. Go ahead and adjust it. And again, you want to adjust it in the center visually there, so in case you need to redefine it manually, you know you're selecting the same point. So I'll go ahead, again, I remove the key value, effectively remove the key value there. So don't, because you don't want to use it if you don't need it. So go here, right to our last good frame. Go ahead and kill those keyframes from the end. Lock that baby. And then go ahead here and redefine it after the hand passes through. And go ahead, go forward, and then let's go ahead and go back to our graph editor here and combine those last 2 points, tracker 20 and 21. Shift 7. And now you can see in that graph editor that it was all green, that we've got enough points to do a solve, to get a solve, or at least a certain level of a solve. You can see it's all green. So now that we've got all those tracking points, we'll just go ahead and hit go. You can see we've got pixel error value 0.5. It happens pretty fast. But again, this is a good example. You can see that doesn't resemble the background perfectly. You've got these points out here in the front. They're located correctly in the same plane. And these are all, you know, at least back in distance. But based upon the motion blur in the scene and so forth, it's actually not surprising that they're not lined up perfectly. But again, we've got this 0.5 value, and everything kind of seems like it would be okay. But again, this is using your eye. Don't rely on that 100%. You've got to take a look at stuff yourself. And if we go ahead and take the camera, you can see that we've got actually this kind of big, a little bit of a jump and kind of going up and down this area, even though the pixel error values is around 0.5. So you can't rely on that. So let's go ahead and see that there up at the front view there. You can see that there's a really good spike in that. So let's go ahead and take a look at the graph editor and take a look at our camera, our solved camera. You can actually see that, or actually, I'm sorry, if we take a look at the trackers, you can see here, take a look at this tracker 5. There we go. You can see that we're having some problems here. You can see there's a big spike there that's going to cause problems for us. Some kind of error. You can see that the error value is just not working for us. So now Victor intentionally did a few things wrong in here in dealing with a shot with a lot of motion blur. He didn't use any of the smoothing functionality that you have within the trackers when you have a lot of great tools here within Synthesize in which you can actually do that. So this is causing a lot of these errors to happen and so forth. Seeing the camera move back and forth, the jumps in the paths and so forth. And so let's go ahead and take a look at how we can kind of accomplish this and fix this. Let's go ahead and take a look here. Scroll through, look in the upper left hand corner of the green screen. It's tracker 17. And if we examine it, watch what's happening as it's going through. You can see that surrounding area is kind of jumping around. It's really moving from up and down and left to right. And basically this is the area in which the tracker is looking for the next keyframe. it's not actually looking, it's kind of showing you that this predicted motion, it's not actually looking where it needs to be looking. It's kind of a quality clue or a visual clue, if you would. So if you select it, let's go ahead back to our tracking panel. We can kind of get around this and kind of fix and help smooth this out. What we're going to do is go ahead and set the key for every frame, and our key smooth set to frame 4 for smoothness. Let's go ahead and track forward or track backward and hit play. Okay, it gets lost. You can actually see now how much smoother this point is. Notice that the kind of prediction isn't jumping around, moving from left to right and so forth. It's actually helping us deal by getting rid of some of that noise and jumpiness that it was. And you'll see that that actually is really going to have a big impact on our solve. So we kind of want to do this same thing on some of the other trackers as well. We'll just take a look here at some of the points. Let's say take this point, unlock it, go ahead and do the same thing that we did before, key 1 with a key smooth of 4. Go back, make sure we're going forward, and go and hit play. So now it's actually was able to kind of actually goes, and when she crosses in front, see how the finger, we get a little bit of a jump there. It actually jumps for that frame, and then it comes back immediately at the frame afterwards. And this is a case that maybe you don't want to get rid of this. What we can do is we can manually adjust, because you can see you can actually get a little bit of the tracking mark that's visible. You can see the upper cross as well as the one as well. And you can see, check what's happening here, you can see the error settings that we have. As we move this keyframe with the key smooth and setting the key, you can see how it impacts our error. So you can see it's affecting the position of the next frames as well. You can see that move up and down. So if we go down to the next keyframe, you can see that's the same thing that's happening. It's doing a little bit of adjustment to the keyframes around it as well, based upon that key smooth value that we have. And so we'll go ahead and lock that one again. And we'll go ahead and do the same with all the rest if we want. The more smoothness we add, and it should hopefully help us end up with a smoother track in the end. But what we're going to do now, in addition to that, is what we want to do is go ahead and select some tracking points on a different plane, because what we want to have is, in all our stuff that we've been doing so far in the class, is have a lot of different Z depth. So we have some parallax. So go ahead and go back here to the first frame. Go ahead and let's track this point here. Again, this is a lot closer to the camera. Okay, track it, and you can see that in about gets killed really quickly. But if you actually look at it, we'll go ahead and switch this to 1 and 4. There you go. It's a little bit smoother, but you can actually see what's happening. It's actually losing a little bit of an error there. But yeah, you can see there as it moves around, it's actually quite a bit of error there. So what we're going to do, we'll go ahead and come back here. Frame, adjust it, because it's really only a couple frames that we need to manually move it, and that might be able to help us. Because it's only 4 frames, it's not that big a deal to go back and fix it. But another thing that we can do on that point, we'll go ahead and add the tracking point there. We're going to use what's called here if we go here, track, use handheld, use others. And so what that does, it actually uses the other trackers within the scene to help figure out the track, this individual track, and take a look at that. It's actually working really well. It's staying very nicely locked in the middle. We didn't have to do anything manually, so we'll go ahead and lock that. So that functionality that you have there can actually be used with auto trackers as well. It's not just applicable to manual trackers as we're doing here. So go ahead and select that, and then go ahead, leaving that setting on. It's actually helping that as well. You can see it's actually doing a nice job remaining locked there, even without all the motion blur. Let's go ahead and try and lock that. And we'll find another tracking point on that corner. That actually works really well without much manual intervention on our part. And so we'll go ahead and select this one back here in the back. A little bit different Z-space. And again, that one seems to work really well. So go ahead and lock that. Now if you use the regular handheld sticky or steady camera or something like that, it's actually not going to work very well. It's actually going to get lost and not functionality. So if it doesn't work on one, you might try it on the other one to see if it helps it. We're going to pick this one way back on the ground plane that we know, and then, but it's kind of in the same position as the back green screen with a little bit of curve. You can see that's actually looking well. And we'll go ahead and lock that one. So now it's time to go ahead and hit solve. We'll go ahead and hit go. Click OK. You can see that the path is much better. There's a little hitch right there, a little hiccup, if you would. But overall, if you take a look at the overall path, it's actually much smoother than what we had before. We've actually done a nice job. Now that little hitch might not be too visible, just based upon the speed of the movement of the camera and the motion blur. We can actually take a look at fixing this manually. And if we take a look at the camera itself here in the graph editor, you can go ahead and see here. Go ahead and open that baby up. Let's select all of them. We'll actually just take a look at maybe an individual channel. We'll go ahead and look at the X, Y, and Z, and we'll zoom in here. You can see that by clicking on that and dragging that up, we can create a zoom. And you can see a little hitch there in the Z. Now that might actually be, in some cases could be something normal, but we'll use this tool, select it, and click that errant point. And what it is kind of an averaging tool. What it does, it will take and average it based upon the points around it, effectively smoothing out the curve. So again, it's a good way of kind of manually up, and you can see that little hitch in the Z is gone from our camera path here. But you have to be careful in doing that, because it could be an actual camera move, because if you actually do have a camera that is kind of shaking around and a little bit frenetic, you can actually smooth your camera too much so it doesn't actually end up lining up correctly. So we'll do the same thing. We'll take a look at some other paths here. There we can see on the tilt. Go ahead and select that point. Voila. Averages it out. It's more likely if you found an error in one path, it's going to find an error in another path. But again, you can clicking and dragging up and down. Changes the zoom on it. We'll go ahead and smooth that one out. Smooth that one out as well. It's just a really nice way to fix the little minor problems that you might not be able to fix otherwise, or do it in a manual way. If you take a look at the end here, you've kind of got the same a little bit as well. We'll go ahead and zoom in. this is a case of where it might actually be something that's normal with the camera. There's a little bit of weirdness, a little bit of fast movement. If you're examining the look in the camera view and you don't see your tracking points drifting, then maybe it is actually the camera versus an error in the camera solve. Now, if you compare the path that we've got now doing our manual tracker that we did throughout this class, it's really much improved compared to the auto tracker that we did right off the start. Now, of course, we could have finessed the auto tracker when we started out in the class, but you could see that we didn't do any kind of trickery or anything. Victor went through, manually added points, manually looked at it, made sure they looked correct, and we ended up with a resulting solve that's probably much smoother than what you get if you started with that auto tracker and tried to spend your time kind of futzing around with that and making it better. But if you remember this shot from the other tracking courses, this actually solved really, really quickly using syn101. It's actually quite a difficult shot to do, and we got something that was actually pretty decent very quickly. Well, that's it for this class. Be sure to drop by the forums if you have any questions. We'd love to hear from you. We'd really love to get some discussion going in the forums about the classes and questions that you might have. Once again, thanks for being a member of the class, and we'll see you next week.